So in this, you're talking about faith, reason, but characters go back and forth with this. What's driving that in writing that scene? Well, the first thing is that in most sort of science fiction genre shows, the approach to this scene might be that the characters would be sitting around talking about, like, okay, how is this button connected to whatever detonation device it's connected to? How do we disassemble it? How do we take it apart? How do we stop the timer? Who built it? And those kinds of mechanical questions that are sort of very plot-oriented. I mean, this scene, we chose this clip because it really kind of distinguishes the way in which we approach storytelling differently than maybe other shows that are sort of in this sort of genre. And so instead of having the characters talking about that, we decided to take this theme of faith and kind of use that as the nexus of what would actually drive the discussion between these two characters.
And, Locke and Jack started this conversation in the season 1 finale when Locke is basically saying, I think we're here for a reason, I don't know what it is. But now he's referring to this Dharma film that they saw. But the most important part of the scene, the operative part of the scene, is that Locke says to Jack, I don't want to do this alone. And this basically taps into what Jack's, sort of fundamental philosophy is, which is live together, die alone. And this idea that these people need each other, that Locke could very easily push the button, but he needs Jack to do it. That was the intent behind the scene, because we knew that when we were doing orientation, that this idea that this button needs to be pushed every 108 minutes, and it's going to happen all season long until it doesn't get pushed, and then we'll find out what happens. It's absolutely absurd and ridiculous. But the only way that we could get the audience to buy into it was that if Locke could convince Jack to push the button. It was easy to get Locke to push the button, but he had to get the most cynical person. And the reason that Jack pushes the button isn't because he believes that something bad's going to happen. He just thinks that there's maybe a 0.1% of a chance that something bad might happen, and he's not willing to risk it. Right. So you can say going like, hey, maybe you should push it.
Yeah.
But
He's a fried cake. He's encouraged. Yeah. Exactly.
Advice.
Exactly. But we set up this thematic debate between sort of faith and empiricism, and basically in many different iterations on the show, that is what our story has been about, which is what are the costs and consequences of faith, and this debate basically was this sort of one of the formative debates between these two characters, and then over the course of the series, we've seen Jack, and Locke move to different poles on this same issue, and this again is something which really does come to a kind of conclusion of finale.
We wrote a scene in the episode where Sun and Jin and Saeed all meet their demise, where basically Jack is now trying to convince Sawyer not to pull the wires out. And in this instance, Jack is saying the same thing here, which is nothing's going to happen. But now he's Locke and Sawyer's Jack. And, he's now the one who has faith, and Sawyer's the one who's much more pragmatic about it. And it just felt like when we were talking about that scene, this is a way you illustrate how far that character's come.
You do seem to do a lot of echoing in the series.
Are you Mr. Echoing, or?
No, this is
Thank you, Portland. You're going to the bathroom, Portland. Good.
But in terms of even certain lines, certain dialogue coming seasons, mirroring seasons, and mirrors seem to play an important role as well. Sure, absolutely. What's the thinking behind doing that mirroring of seasons? I think that there's no kind of easy answer to that other than we have certain thematic issues that kind of constantly, resonate through the show, and we try to kind of articulate them, and illustrate them through different characters, and so, different thematic things come up, and, we sort of felt ultimately in a big picture way, like the final season of the show was supposed to be, was meant to bring you back to the first season of the show. We were trying to create this sort of symmetry, and so, we did things like in Across the Sea, like taking the scene from the first season and showing those characters, kind of contextualizing the discovery of the Adam and Eve skeletons, and showing where those characters were in the first season of the show, showing how far they've come, how different they were, how little they knew about the Island Men. And in sort of a fundamental way, the last season has been constructed on a character axis. The Sideways is a way to sort of re-explore the characters. It for us was like the first season when we had the flashbacks and they were new. It was a new idea. Learning about those characters was really cool. When you first found out Hurley was a lottery winner or Sawyer was a con man, that was really cool. We thought, let's give the audience that experience in the last season, sort of getting to know these characters again, but in a slightly different way, and that led to the slight differences that existed in the Sideways storytelling.
And we're using the mirrors very prevalently in the Sideways storytelling because there's occasionally this feeling that people have when you look at yourself in the mirror of displacement. You go, that person who's looking back at you in the mirror, is that me? So there's this whole sort of sense of identity. And one of the things that people said about the Sideways in the early part of the season is, we don't like this because that's not John Locke. The John Locke that we knew was not with Helen. Or that's not Jack because the Jack we knew didn't have a son. And it's this very interesting sort of nature versus nurture conversation, which is, isn't Sawyer the same guy? He's a cop here. He was a con man there, but isn't he the same guy?
He's the same archetype. I mean, even though the circumstances of his narrative are different, he is the same archetype.
But that idea of looking in the mirror is in a sense to basically make the audience have that who am I, what am I, where am I sort of disassociation that we all experience sometimes when we're looking at ourselves.
If there's one question I get from readers and people who've written in, and I'm sure people in this audience, but a lot of people want to know just how much did you guys know how it was going to end when you started, and how much are you just making it up as you go along? Well, I mean, the answer is a combination of all of those things. I mean, at the very beginning of the show, we knew we talked about what the very end of the show should be, and that actually has stayed the same since then. And really between the end of the first season and the beginning of the second season, when we had time, we really constructed the mythology in great detail. But then before each season, we would have these things we call writers' mini camps, where without the pressure of next week's script, we would sit down with the writers for a month and we would basically work out the details of the upcoming season. So there was this kind of architecture, there was a superstructure, and then there was sort of a much more detailed architecture for each season. But then we would write each episode by episode. I mean, we're not like J.K. Rowling. We are not completely in control of our universe. We collaborate with 425 people on Lost, and a lot of what we respond to as writers, we watch the episodes, we watch dailies, we see relationships unfold, and we would write to those things. The show is sort of its own organic entity, and it tells you what it wants to be, and the show would be much worse for not sort of listening to it. So, it kind of was a combination of all of those things. There was some improvisation, but there was the big mythological sort of pieces were laid out, for quite some time.
There's a really interesting thing that happens, which is the two questions that we get asked most often are the first, are you making it up as you go along? And then the second is, what impact did the fans have on the outcome of the show? Now, people want the answer to the first question to be, we are not making it up as we go along. We have a binder, and everything that we're going to do is in there. And they want the answer to the second question to be, the fans have an enormous impact on the show. Oh, my God. But both things can't coexist. Because if you had any impact on the show, we'd basically be like, I'm sorry, your idea is not in the binder. So the idea that we have to live between the space. And the fact of the matter is we are fallible. We make mistakes, and often. The question is, how obvious are our mistakes? When we make big mistakes, you guys know about it. Nikki and Paolo, for example. Sometimes we make smaller mistakes, and we're able to catch them in time, and you guys never really know that we made them. And if we weren't making it up as we went along, we have to allow ourselves, because the show lives in this tightrope space. One of the reasons we believe people watch the show is because you're like, this could end catastrophically. There's a part of all of us that when we go and see the high wire act at the circus, we're like, I kind of want to see him fall. It would be terrible, but it would be interesting. And so, we have to walk that line. That's what the show does. And when you walk that line, when you take risks, sometimes you miss, but you can't ever hit a home run if you don't swing the bat.
What's an example, or is there?
Because I don't know anything about sports. Did I get that right?
You do have to swing.
The metaphor doesn't play with orcs.